Thanks for tuning into this new audio series, Photographiliac, hosted on Quest of the Art Life podcast. I am B. Smitty. So this podcast audio series, Photographiliac, was going to be a separate podcast. The company I host my podcast on, I cannot have multiple podcast series. I know there's a bunch of options. I just like the company I've worked with, so I figured why not have the audio series be within Quest of the Art Life podcast, which does actually, the more I think about it, open up other opportunities for mini-series programs within Quest of the Art Life. And I've been thinking a lot about it, actually. Maybe have like a guest series and that type of thing. But today is the premiere episode of the audio series, Photographiliac, Episode 1, Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21st, 1960, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. He was described as energetic and happy until about the age of 4, when he had a surgery to correct a double hernia. It was told that his personality had completely changed at that point after that surgery. That's kind of argued on later in life by people, but that seemed to be a turning point for him when he was a kid. He pretty much remained mostly to himself through school. He did end up entertaining his classmates by pulling pranks and faking seizures. He would just basically fall on the ground and flail and make noises, and he would even do it like just up onto people, basically, running into them, faking a seizure. His classmates ended up calling it doing a Dahmer. One of Dahmer's classmates, Mike Krukel, said, quote, "In our senior year, they took photographs of all the groups. They took photographs of the sports groups and various clubs and everything else for the yearbook. And Dahmer got in a group of photos that he was not a member of. He would just get in there and take the photo. He also, Truco also said, quote, "I think the funniest one is he got into the National Honor Society group." So he was like in the group photo for National Honor Society, and he definitely wasn't anywhere close to being a part of that. He continued on, quote, "Which is supposed to be, the brightest kids, and he was not in that group academically, but he was in the photograph. And I believe the president of the group had him blacked out, so in the yearbooks, there's a body without a head." You can find that online if you literally look up the Jeffrey Dahmer class photo. It's actually super disturbing. There's just basically a torso with a blacked out head, and that's actually Dahmer because he's in the photo of the National Honor Society, but he wasn't supposed to be. And so from an early age, Dahmer had an interest in dead animals. He would collect animal carcasses from the roadside, being hit by vehicles and whatnot. And he would even pick them up while he was with his friends. He would dismember these animals either at home or in the woods. And according to one of his friends, Dahmer dismembered these animals and stored the body parts in the tool shed at his home, at Dahmer's home. Explained that he was curious that how animals, quote, fitted together. In October 1966, the family moved to Dalestown, Ohio. When Joyce gave birth in December, Jeffrey was allowed to choose a name for his new baby brother. He ended up choosing the name David. The same year, Lionel, his dad, earned a degree and started work as an analytical chemist in nearby Akron, Ohio, which kind of makes you think that maybe he got that Jeffrey Dahmer got some of his knowledge about some type of chemical situation because he uses them later in life from his dad. In 1968, the family moved to Bath Township, Ohio. 2 years after that, during a chicken dinner, Dahmer asked Lionel what would happen if chicken bones were placed in bleach. Lionel, pleased by Dahmer's curiosity, demonstrated how to safely bleach and preserve animal bones. And then Dahmer incorporated these techniques into his bone collecting. It's pretty interesting to be pleased by that question. Kind of interesting, huh? Dahmer committed his first murder in 1978, 3 weeks after his graduation. At the time, he was living alone in the family home in Bath. That's Bath Township. Following their decision to divorce, Lionel temporarily lived in a nearby motel, and Joyce had relocated to Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, with his younger brother David. So I think with Jeffrey Dahmer's kind of like mental state and what he was going through, I think being alone in the house ended up being a bad thing for him, and for what he was going through at the time. And so through my research, I was trying to figure out if there's anything with photography with Dahmer, and I think that story of him joining in the group photos was interesting for sure. And from what I found, I think Dahmer ended up photographing his victims. I'd say probably 1990 with a Polaroid camera. Also, I looked all around for like evidence and that type of thing, and couldn't find like a model of the Polaroid camera, like which version he used. But Polaroid was incorporated back in 1937. It's got to start by grafting polarizer technology onto every product imaginable, including 3D movies and glare-reducing goggles for dogs. During World War II, Polaroid designed and manufactured numerous products for the armed force services, including an infrared night viewing device, polarizing and colored filters for rangefinders and periscopes. The invention of commercially viable instant cameras, which were easy to use, is credited to scientist Edwin Land, who unveiled the first commercial instant camera, the Model 95 Land camera. And Polaroid's first camera was put on sale at Jordan Marsh in downtown Boston during the Christmas season in 1948. Instant photography packs all the operations of a darkroom inside of the film itself. This would be crucial because obviously Dahmer wouldn't want to go develop film at your local drugstore. So the development of instant photography made this, obviously before the digital age, made it where he can take these types of photos and collect them. So yeah, the film has to catch light from a camera lens, turn it into a negative image, then reverse the image and make a positive one. Has to start the process at the right time, end at the right time, and make sure the image lasts. Polaroid's invention of instant photography created a new business line that just didn't sell cameras. They charged about $1 for each sheet of coated paper that developed into a photograph before people's eyes. The film sales produce huge profit margins with no competitor to do anything about it. So yeah, I mean, Polaroid was literally a brand new invention. It's the first of its kind, where you can actually just, commercially just buy, and it prints right out of the camera instant. And watching it develop is crazy. It's so cool, like using the cameras of today, like the Fuji Instax, which we'll get into that right now. Actually, this is before Fuji Instax, but so pretty much, once there's a new invention, there's going to be people wanting to copy that invention. So when Kodak first introduced its new cameras in 1976 and Polaroid sued, the instant photography business was about to take off. In the 2 years that followed, in large part because Kodak's added advertising, and I think that's the big problem with Polaroid. I mean, Kodak was like a juggernaut of a brand, with a lot of money. And even though Polaroid created something new, it's tough when you have a company just kind of snagging the idea when they have all the money. But total sales of instant cameras climbed to 7.4 million cameras in 1976 to 10.3 million in 1977, and then 14.3 million in 1978. That's pretty crazy. So in 2 years, it basically doubled in sales. And it took 10 years, but the court ruled in favor of Polaroid when it came to the lawsuit, ordering Kodak to cease instant camera production and paid $909.5 million. It was a federal court victory, but Polaroid officials sought $12 billion, and most people expected around $2 billion. I think if they would have got I think actually Polaroid was not out of line with that number. I think $12 billion is probably what they should have got, and that probably would have created a lot more opportunity for Polaroid to flourish and still be it would still be a mainstream brand today. I feel like if they would have got the $12 billion instead of $909 million. That's just my opinion. But yeah, Polaroid ended up filing for bankruptcy in October of 2001. It just never could keep up. I think once the change, it's pretty much into like the late 70s and probably early 80s. Polaroid just like was Polaroid and instant. So the problem is, the late 70s, it's like massive sales, and Kodak comes and starts making instant cameras. And again, it took 10 years. So we're talking late 80s when that's finalized, and just photography was already like so evolved by then, where you get 1 hour photo developed and all that kind of stuff. If you take it to the drugstore, and it was cheaper, obviously, to just buy a roll of film and take it to the store to get processed. And Polaroid just was never able to really turn things around. It pretty much, once it got to that height of the late 70s to the early 80s, it was pretty much a downfall from there. And that's why, I think that 900 million probably did help and got through some stuff, but it didn't really make a difference at the end. That's where the 12 billion would have really changed things for him, especially being the obvious creator. But it is what it is, So 1990. So we're going back. So this is after the lawsuit, that obviously Polaroid's still around, and so yeah, 1990. Dahmer lived in an apartment 213 at 924 North 25th Street in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So he was no longer in Ohio at this point, and this is around the time that I think he started shooting photos with a Polaroid camera, and and for him is strictly to pretty much have viewing material for what he was doing. So pretty much he would entice his victims to his apartment by promising money to photograph them, and he typically would offer $50. Dahmer's neighbor, Pamela Bass, recounted a time that she helped Dahmer clean his home after the landlord threatened to evict Dahmer for horrible smells. And Dahmer would always use the excuse of like his fish tank or a freezer, the meat going bad in a freezer. And he would just use these things, like the fish tank, and he just people just took his word for it. But Bass went on to say, quote, "I went in to help him clean up, and he told me, it's the freezer over there. My grandma had sent me some meat, and I put it in there, and I went back to her house, and I forgot to plug it in. I haven't been around dead people. I don't know anything about how they smell. He had a very good disguise. That's what it was." So he, for a while, he would just offer people money. Like generally $50 to go to his apartment, where he would end up murdering the victim, and he he would photograph them. He would pose them, photograph them. Sometimes he would actually photograph them before, when he would have whatever sexual actions they were up to. He would take some Polaroids, but he mainly would pose his victims for Polaroid shots after they were deceased. He also experimented on his victims by drilling holes into their head and pouring either hot water or acid or something. He was hoping to basically create a zombie that he can just dominate, is basically, I think, is what he has been quoted to say. On July 22nd, 1991, he approached three men and offered all three of them $100 to accompany him to his apartment to pose for nude photographs. And it was only one of them decided to go back to the apartment. And upon entering the apartment, Edwards noted a foul odor and several boxes of acid on the floor. Dahmer claimed it to him that it was used for cleaning bricks. After some conversation, so Dahmer wanted to get him under control, and so he basically asked him to look at his fish tank. He asked the victim to look over the fish tank, and when he did, he got one handcuff on him. And the victim responded, "What's happening?" And Dahmer tried to get the other handcuff on to the victim's wrist, but he was able to get away from that. He basically was, he got away from it, but he still stayed in there because he knew he was in not a good situation. But Dahmer was unsuccessful at cuffing the second wrist. But he did get him to go to his room to pose for these nude photos. I think probably was just thinking, let's get these photos over with and I want to get out of here. When he got into the room, there was a tape playing of The Exorcist 3, which is Dahmer has said himself that's his favorite movie. And he also noted that there's a 57-gallon drum in the corner, which odors were coming from. He ended up catching Dahmer off guard and sucker punched him, and was able to get out of the apartment still with a handcuff on him. So at 11:30 p.m. on that July 22nd, the victim was able to flag down two Milwaukee police officers, Roth and Mueller, at the corner of North 25th Street. The officers noted Edwards had a handcuff attached to the wrist. He explained to the officers that, quote, a freak had placed the handcuffs on him and asked if the police could remove them, but the officer's key wouldn't work. The victim told him that he had been there at the apartment for 5 hours before he was able to escape, and was able to take them back to the apartment. So when the officers and the victim got back to apartment 213, Dahmer actually invited them into the house and acknowledged that he had indeed placed the handcuffs on him. He basically, was trying to get out of it, talking with the officers, and, the officers obviously knew something was up, and the police officers went to tell him, or ask him, hey, where's the key for this handcuff? We can't get the handcuff off. Dahmer, at that point, he was a heavy drinker, and pretty much in his own lapse of judgment, or not really being aware of what situation he's really in, he told him the key is in the drawer next to his bed. But the problem for Dahmer is that's where he kept all of his Polaroids. And so when he went into when the officer went into the room, opened the drawer for inspection, and contained a ton of Polaroid photos, and he uttered the words, "These are for real." there's probably I think the total, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head here from research I've done. It's I want to say it was 70 some Polaroids. It was close to 80 Polaroids were in that drawer, and yeah, there's a bunch of Polaroids. They're of they're, like I said earlier, they were posed. They were in various stages of dismemberment too. There was just, it was like his whole process, and some were posed like in his own seductive sexual manner after the fact as well, after they were murdered. And they also, the Polaroids also depicted Dahmer engaging in sex acts with the bodies. You would think with this type of case that he would be able to get maybe an insanity plea or something, but he was found legally sane because he also had intercourse with living men as well. Dahmer ended up confessing that he made his victims pose for the Polaroids on a black table, and with this black table he had been planning to use to make an altar that featured remains for viewing. So his plan with these victims too is to basically make an actual shrine with their bones and all that. He spray painted them, I think, a certain color or a certain way to preserve, and I think to make them look a certain way as well. So if he ever got questioned, and when he was asked why he photographed his victims, Dahmer replied, quote, "It was my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty." And I want to thank you for listening to episode 1 of Photographiliac. If you go to photographiliac.com, you can get some information. Also, if you go to patreon.com/bsmitty, there's different ways you can help support this podcast and even get a podcast shout out on the next episode. And I appreciate your support in listening to this episode. Until next time.